There is a country on this planet smaller than the state of Nevada. A country you could drive across, coast to coast, in a single long day. And inside that country, within driving distance of each other, you will find snow-capped volcanoes rising above 5,000 meters. Untouched Amazon rainforest containing more species per square kilometer than almost anywhere else on Earth. A colonial city so perfectly preserved that UNESCO named it among the very first World Heritage Sites in history. And a chain of islands so biologically strange that a 26-year-old Englishman visited them in 1835 and walked away with the idea that would eventually rewrite humanity's understanding of its own existence. This country should not be able to contain all of that. It does anyway. This is Ecuador. The tiny country that has everything. And by the end of this video, you're going to wonder how a place this small managed to fit in this much world. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of storytelling you came to YouTube for, subscribe to Rome Folios right now. Every week, somewhere the world forgot to look. Hit subscribe. Let's go. The line that splits the world. Ecuador takes its name from a single geographic fact: the equator. The imaginary line drawn by mathematicians and cartographers that divides the Earth into northern and southern hemispheres passes directly through this country, not approximately, not nominally, but precisely, measurably, in a way that you can stand on and confirm with your own body. Just north of the capital city, at a site called Mitad del Mundo, the middle of the world, a monument marks the equatorial line, and visitors come specifically to do something that sounds almost too simple to be worth the trip. They stand with one foot in the northern hemisphere and one foot in the southern hemisphere simultaneously. It photographs well. It sounds like a novelty. But the geography behind it is genuinely significant, and it shapes almost everything else about what makes this country remarkable. Because Ecuador's location on the equator, combined with the presence of the Andes mountain range running directly through its center, produces a geographic compression that exists almost nowhere else on the planet. In most countries, climate zones are separated by enormous distances. You travel for days, sometimes weeks, to move from tropical lowland to alpine highland to temperate coast. In Ecuador, you can move between 4 entirely distinct geographic worlds within a single day's drive. The coast, the Andean highlands, the Amazon basin, and, a short flight away, the volcanic islands of the Galapagos. 4 worlds, 1 country, roughly the size of the state of Colorado. Nowhere else on Earth compresses this much ecological and geographic diversity into a footprint this small. The capital suspended in the sky. Quito, Ecuador's capital, sits at an elevation of 2,850 meters above sea level, making it, by most measures, the second highest capital city in the world, behind only La Paz, Bolivia. The city occupies a long, narrow valley in the eastern range of the Andes, hemmed in on both sides by volcanic peaks that are visible from almost every street in the historic center. Quito's old town, known formerly as the Centro Histórico, was, alongside Krakow in Poland, one of the very first sites ever designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized in 1978 for containing what UNESCO described as the best preserved historic center in all of Latin America. The scale of preservation here is genuinely remarkable. Walking through Quito's Old Town, you move through streets lined with buildings constructed primarily during the Spanish colonial period, beginning in the 16th century. Churches, monasteries, and civic buildings built in a style that blends European Baroque influence with the artistic traditions of indigenous and mestizo craftsmen who actually executed the work. The result is a distinctive artistic tradition called the Quito School, a fusion of Spanish religious iconography with Andean artistic sensibility, visible in the gold-leafed altars and elaborately carved interiors of churches like La Compañía de Jesús, considered one of the most ornately decorated churches anywhere in South America. Above the Old Town, the Basílica del Voto Nacional rises in neo-Gothic spires that, on close inspection, reveal a detail that surprises almost every first-time visitor. The gargoyles carved into the church's exterior are not the traditional European demons and grotesques. They are Ecuadorian animals. Iguanas, tortoises, armadillos, condors, each carved in the same Gothic architectural style typically reserved for medieval European monsters, replaced here with the specific fauna of a country that, even in its religious architecture, could not resist asserting its own extraordinary biological identity. North of Quito, in the foothills surrounding the town of Otavalo, one of the largest and most significant indigenous markets in all of South America operates every Saturday, drawing vendors and buyers from across the surrounding Andean communities. The Otavalo textile tradition predates Spanish colonization by centuries, and the Otavaleño people, one of Ecuador's most economically successful and culturally resilient indigenous groups, have maintained and continuously evolved a weaving tradition that combines pre-Columbian techniques with patterns and color combinations that have made Otavalo textiles recognized and sought after internationally. Walking through the Plaza de Ponchos at the market's peak hours, you move through an overwhelming density of color hand-woven textiles in patterns specific to particular Andean communities, alongside leather goods, jewelry, and produce brought down from surrounding mountain villages. The Otavaleño women, many wearing traditional dress that includes elaborately wrapped gold bead necklaces and dark wrap skirts, conduct business in a mixture of Spanish and Quechua, the indigenous language that remains actively spoken throughout the northern highlands. This is not a market stage for tourists, though tourists certainly come. It is a market that has operated, in some form, for longer than European contact with this continent, adapted, evolved, but fundamentally continuous with trading traditions that predate the modern nation of Ecuador itself. The Avenue of the Volcanoes. South of Quito, the Pan American Highway runs through a corridor that 19th century explorer Alexander von Humboldt named, with characteristic understatement, the Avenue of the Volcanoes. The name is accurate to a degree that almost defies belief. Within a stretch of highway covering roughly 300 kilometers, more than 24 volcanic peaks rise on either side of the road, several of them still active, several of them among the most visually perfect volcanic cones found anywhere on Earth. Cotopaxi is the most famous of them, rising to 5,897 meters. Cotopaxi is one of the highest active volcanoes in the world. and its near-perfect symmetrical cone, snow-capped year-round despite sitting almost exactly on the equator, has made it one of the most photographed natural landmarks in all of South America. The mountain last erupted significantly in 2015, sending ash plumes high enough to disrupt flights and force evacuations of surrounding communities, a reminder that the volcano's serene, postcard-perfect appearance conceals genuine, ongoing geological activity. Hikers who make the trek to the refuge at 4,800 meters, just below the permanent snowline, find themselves looking across a high-altitude plain called the Paramo, a unique Andean ecosystem of grassland and hardy alpine vegetation that exists only at these specific elevations in the tropical Andes, found nowhere else on Earth in quite this form. Below Cotopaxi, Lake Limpopopungo reflects the volcano's snow-covered summit on still mornings, creating one of the most photographed compositions in all of Ecuadorian landscape photography. The mountain, doubled, framed by golden paramo grass and circling Andean condors. Further south, along the avenue of the volcanoes, Chimborazo holds a distinction that surprises almost everyone who learns it for the first time. While Chimborazo, at 6,263 meters, is not the tallest mountain on Earth, by elevation above sea level, that title belongs to Everest. It holds a different and genuinely unique record. Because Earth is not a perfect sphere but bulges slightly at the equator due to the planet's rotation, and because Chimborazo sits very close to the equatorial line, its summit is measured from the exact center of the Earth, the single point on the planet's surface that is farthest from the Earth's core, farther than Everest. Farther than any other point on the planet. Chimborazo's summit is, by this specific and scientifically verified measure, the closest point on Earth to the sun and stars. Northwest of the volcanic corridor, in the cloud forest surrounding the small town of Mindo, an entirely different kind of natural spectacle awaits. Mindo sits within one of the most biodiverse regions for hummingbirds anywhere on the planet. With over 150 documented species recorded in the surrounding cloud forest, a density of hummingbird diversity that has made this small Andean town an internationally recognized destination for bird watchers specifically interested in these extraordinary creatures. At feeding stations throughout the Mindo area, dozens of hummingbird species can be observed within the same hour, sometimes the same minute. The Andean emerald, the booted racket-tail with its elongated, spatula-tipped tail feathers, the violet-tailed sylph with iridescent plumage that shifts color depending on the angle of light. Hummingbirds beat their wings at rates that can exceed 80 beats per second, and their hearts can reach over 1,200 beats per minute during flight. Physiological extremes that push the boundaries of what vertebrate biology is generally understood to be capable of sustaining. In Mindo, surrounded by mist-shrouded cloud forest where orchids grow on tree branches and electric blue morpho butterflies drift between shafts of filtered sunlight, you can watch a dozen of these extraordinary creatures compete for the same feeder within arm's reach, their wings producing a sound that resembles, more than anything else, a barely audible mechanical hum. If you're still with me, and what comes next includes one of the most biodiverse forests on the planet, subscribe to Rome Folios right now. This is what we do. Every week, hit subscribe, the forest that breaks records. East of the Andes, the land drops dramatically from the high mountain corridor into the Amazon basin, and Ecuador's small slice of Amazonian territory contains some of the most concentrated biodiversity ever documented anywhere on Earth. Yasuni National Park in Ecuador's eastern Amazon region has been identified by multiple scientific studies as containing some of the highest levels of species diversity recorded in any location on the planet, for amphibians, for insects, for trees, and for several other taxonomic groups. Yasuni holds or rivals world records for the sheer number of species documented within relatively small sample areas. A single hectare of Yasuni forest can contain more tree species than exist in all of North America combined. The park sits within what biologists call the Napo Moist Forest ecoregion, a zone where Amazon basin biodiversity, Andean foothill influence, and a climate that has remained relatively stable for tens of thousands of years have combined to produce a concentration of life that researchers are still working to fully document. Yasuni is also home to the Waorani people, an indigenous group whose traditional territory overlaps significantly with the park and whose way of life, including traditional hunting practices using blowguns and poison-tipped darts, traditional fishing, and small-scale agriculture integrated directly into the forest ecosystem, represents one of the more intact examples of indigenous Amazonian culture remaining in Ecuador. Some Waorani communities maintain limited contact with the outside world by choice, while others have engaged more extensively with tourism, conservation work, and broader Ecuadorian society. A small number of Waorani individuals, along with related groups, are believed to remain in voluntary isolation deep within the most remote sections of the park, among the last uncontacted peoples remaining anywhere in the Amazon basin. The forest canopy of Yasuni, viewed from above, stretches in unbroken green toward every horizon, concealing a vertical ecosystem of extraordinary complexity, howler monkeys announcing territorial boundaries with calls audible for kilometers, harpy eagles hunting from the high canopy, pink river dolphins navigating the blackwater tributaries that wind through the forest floor below. Yasuni also sits above significant oil reserves, and the tension between conservation and resource extraction here has become one of the most closely watched environmental policy debates in South America. A small country balancing genuine economic need against the preservation of what may be the single most biodiverse forest remaining anywhere on the planet. The Laboratory of Evolution. In September 1835, a young naturalist named Charles Darwin arrived aboard HMS Beagle at a chain of volcanic islands roughly 1,000 kilometers off the coast of mainland Ecuador. He spent just over a month there. What he observed during that month would, over the following decades, develop into the theory of evolution by natural selection, the single most consequential scientific idea in the history of biology. The Galapagos Islands. Formed by volcanic activity over millions of years, isolated from the South American mainland by a wide and challenging ocean crossing, the islands developed an ecosystem so distinctly shaped by isolation that Darwin found himself documenting variations between species on different islands that seemed, on close inspection, to be related but distinctly adapted to their specific local environment. Finches with beak shapes that varied measurably between islands, apparently shaped by the specific food sources available on each one. Giant tortoises whose shell shapes differed between islands in ways that correlated with the vegetation patterns of each location. The Galapagos giant tortoise is the largest living tortoise species on Earth, with some individuals exceeding 400 kilograms and living well over 100 years. These creatures move through the island's arid lowland vegetation and highland humid zones with an unhurried, almost geological pace, grazing on cactus pads, grasses, and fruit in patterns that have remained essentially unchanged since long before any human being arrived to observe them. Marine iguanas found nowhere else on Earth represent one of the only lizard species that has adapted to forage in the ocean, diving into cold Pacific waters to graze on algae growing on submerged rocks, then returning to bask on volcanic shoreline rock to restore their body temperature, often gathering in dense, motionless clusters that, from a distance, are nearly indistinguishable from the black lava rock they rest upon. Blue-footed boobies perform one of the most distinctive courtship displays in the avian world. Males presenting their startlingly bright blue feet to potential mates in an exaggerated, almost comedic high-stepping dance that has made them one of the most recognizable and most photographed bird species in the islands. Galapagos penguins, the only penguin species found north of the equator, surviving here due to the cold, nutrient-rich currents that converge around the islands despite their tropical latitude, represent yet another example of how this specific intersection of equatorial location and unusual oceanographic conditions has produced biological outcomes that exist nowhere else on the planet. Sea lions move through the shallow waters and beaches of the islands with an ease and a lack of fear toward human visitors that surprises almost everyone who encounters them for the first time, a behavioral trait that reflects evolutionary history largely free of significant predation, pressure, or persistent human hunting, at least until relatively recent history. The Galapagos Islands remain one of the most strictly regulated and carefully protected ecosystems on Earth, with visitor numbers, designated trails, and naturalist guide requirements all designed to balance continued scientific and tourism access against the preservation of an ecosystem whose value, scientifically and historically, is almost impossible to overstate. This is where the modern understanding of how life on Earth came to exist in its current form began, in a small, remote, volcanic archipelago belonging to one of the smallest countries in South America. Four worlds. A colonial capital suspended at the edge of the sky, ringed by active volcanoes. An avenue where snow-capped peaks rise directly from the equatorial line, defying every assumption about what the tropics are supposed to look like. A rainforest so dense with species that scientists are still counting, still discovering, still trying to fully understand what exists within it. And a chain of volcanic islands that quietly, irreversibly changed how humanity understands its own origin. All of it inside a country smaller than the state of Nevada. All of it accessible, in sequence, within the span of a single, ambitious trip. Ecuador does not announce itself the way larger countries do. It does not need to. It simply contains, within an almost absurdly small footprint, more ecological and geographic diversity than countries 50 times its size. The tiny country that has everything. It earned that description. If this video showed you a side of Ecuador you didn't know existed, share it with someone who needs to see it too. Subscribe to Rome Folios if you haven't already. We go deep on the places the world forgot to look at every single week. And leave a comment, which of these four worlds would you visit first? I'll see you in the next one.